All right, everyone, it's time to do a little bit of poll analysis. We do have a couple of fairly new polls, but we don't have anything post-Iowa. My suspicion is that Joe Biden, who has led in pretty much every poll in the Nationals, is going to take a hit from Iowa. I don't know how big that hit's going to be. The problem is that he still has that front-runner stability and did still come in fourth. It's better than coming in seventh, I suppose. Now, but it really makes Joe Biden look weak. And going into New Hampshire, keep in mind something. My prediction is Bernie Sanders will win New Hampshire fairly handily. He's been ahead in pretty much all the polls recently. It's basically his second home state. In fact, if Bernie Sanders gets edged by Buttigieg in New Hampshire, which is a possibility, Buttigieg was ahead, I think, in one poll a while ago. If that happens, I would favor Buttigieg to become the Dem nominee. And that's not an exaggeration. With Biden faltering off, Buttigieg would probably vampirize most of his support before South Carolina and Nevada. He could go on to win all four. Of course, Buttigieg ekes out a very, very small win over Sanders in Iowa. And of course, the late numbers broke towards Sanders, but I think Buttigieg was still ahead by a fraction of a percent. And then you have New Hampshire. The other party that could potentially do it, although I kind of discount it, is Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren came in a distant third in Iowa, about expected in the polls. She's been running second or third in most of the New Hampshire polls, but she's been falling. We have to wait for more polling, though, because I'd like to see a couple more from New Hampshire before that happens in the next couple of days. And also on a national level, the tale is Bloomberg's pre-Iowa surge. Michael Bloomberg actually began to surge around the same time Bernie Sanders started rising. Sanders, by the way, has had his hard peak, and he is now falling back down. Again, though, because he did well in Iowa, because he basically tied for first there, he might get a bump from that. As I said before Iowa's results, we have to then wait. And unfortunately, the waiting is terrible, but we have no choice because the general trend is when a candidate has that trajectory, when they suddenly rise 5 to 10 points. Warren did this, Kamala did this, Bloomberg's doing it now. Buttigieg started right before Bloomberg got in, much to his disadvantage. Biden technically had this happen. They then fall back down fairly quickly to their long-term average, and that average tends to be relatively stable. But what if you're peaking and happen to almost win the first state? Do you get a bounce from that solidifies that new voting group that you've had aboard but would otherwise lose? I don't know. Sanders, at the end of the day, is an old dude with heart issues and a socialist. He doesn't have a strong platform in a good economy. He's running almost entirely on wanting to change an economy that by and large is agreed upon by independent voters to work. That could be a big problem. I am still of the mind that if the Democrats are insane enough to nominate Sanders, who by the way wasn't even a Democrat until recently, they will lose the general election. No, I don't think that Bernie Sanders would win. In fact, I think he would lose by a very wide margin. I think that the Bernie Sanders revolution sort of thing begins to fall apart when it's exposed to the sanitizing sunlight of a general election full campaign, because people won't pull punches the way they have been. A lot of people in the Dem Party don't appear to want to spar with Sanders because they're afraid of his fans. Andrew Yang certainly doesn't ever want to say anything negative about Sanders, practically sucks his ass. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't really want to go after Bernie Sanders. None of the lower candidates do. Klobuchar has never attacked him. The only time he's faced fire is from Warren fairly recently, and occasionally Biden stepped in because he's the front runner. Other than that, Bernie Sanders comes out smelling like a rose. Nobody's willing to point out the elephant in the room of his campaign, which is that you're running on a 99% economic platform at a time when most people believe. Now, they can get up on stage and tell their fans, look, I know that it's economic voodoo and the economy doesn't really work for the average American. But perception-wise, the perception is that it does. So Bernie Sanders will lose. It's what they should come out and do. I would be very surprised if Michael Bloomberg ends up being viable, though. Doesn't come in the winner's circle. He's outside the top 5 in Iowa, even if he hasn't really been focusing on these early states. The problem is this. Let's say that Bloomberg's gambit pays off. He's rising up mainly because of the Super Tuesday states and manages to solidify himself there. Oh my God, is that going to cause havoc? It's going to cause fucking havoc on Super Tuesday, and I can't wait for it. It's only not that many weeks away. That's in March. We don't have very long to wait before really we'll know presumably who the candidate will be. By the end of Super Tuesday, you'll have one of two scenarios, okay? You'll either have a candidate who's out in front, who's presumably going to become the nominee, unless there's some systemic reason why they should slough off afterwards, in which case you have to say, well, this is going to get interesting. Or you're going to have a free-for-all in which you get 2 or 3 different people sharing enough delegate count that they're all viable. Then it comes down to a very long campaign of attrition for all of them. Biden, I think, will stick it in. I don't think the fact that he failed in Iowa miserably, admittedly, knocks him out, as long as he comes within the top 3 in New Hampshire. If he doesn't, he's done. If Biden doesn't get into the top 3 there, then obviously he's not the person who's going to be nominated. It doesn't matter if, I mean, he did have money problems as well for a while. He's been a weak front runner the entire time. He simply has been the front runner because the alternatives suck worse. But if people get the sense that he can't even win the nomination because he keeps failing in these early states, they're going to abandon him on Super Tuesday and he won't be nominee. At that point, by the way, if Biden hasn't won half the states by the end of Super Tuesday because of his particular status and acumen, he might as well drop out. He won't, but, you know, he might as well. At that point, I don't know. I think it defaults to Elizabeth Warren winning. If he were to drop, I can't imagine that his fans would back Bernie over Elizabeth Warren because she is a neoliberal pretending to be far left. Oddly enough, though, they'd probably, I guess, back Buttigieg. You know, as far as the establishment side, they would want the people to go to Warren because she's been waiting in the wings. I think the grassroots sort of move would be towards Buttigieg, which is interesting. Biden's done disproportionately well with especially black voters, and Buttigieg, the only thing that the Bernie Sanders fans can find to bitch about is the fact that homophobic individuals don't like Buttigieg. It's very interesting that this is the reason they don't want Buttigieg nominated. They're afraid of the homophobia of the inner cities, which is, by the way, rife, and it's not politically correct to talk about this, but that's why that is happening. Buttigieg has that problem because he seems like a vaguely hayseed Christian but nonetheless gay dude, and this rubs a lot of constituents in the Dem Party who are bigoted the wrong way. By the way, these bigots are not people from Alabama. They're not people from out in the cornfield somewhere. They're from large metropolitan districts. And it's just hilarious. Buttigieg faces an uphill battle despite the fact that arguably he's the only one there who's viable. I realize that some of his platform boils down to Donald Trump is evil and will reverse everything and the Orange Man badge shtick, but I think with Buttigieg it's just a shtick. Some of these people actually believe that bullshit. Some of these people are delusional. I don't think that he's delusional. I also don't think, by the way, he had any personal hand in the obvious corruption in Iowa. Some of his people might have, but I don't think that he sat there and greenlit it, even if he does look like the hayseed Dracula. I don't think so. And that being said, of course, I expect Trump will coast a re-election. His approval's gone above 45 again, and it appears to be rising. Disapproval down, job growth is up, wages have improved for the working and middle class especially. Everyone's gotten tax relief for the most part. There's nothing wrong with Trump that should prevent him from being reelected. The only problem standing in his way is a wall of propaganda, one that he's been surmounting over and over anyway. That's about all. Peace out.